Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails. I'm Henry Faber, one of the two co-founders here at Open Education, and I'm really delighted to be tuning in for our very first school head from the UAE to appear on this podcast. Tom Duckling is the brand new headmaster of Dubai College, definitely one of the most respected and academically selective schools, but a place full of fun too, so I hear, in the UAE. A really, really impressive place. Now, before coming to Dubai, I think Tom was the deputy head at Aiglon College in Switzerland and spent several years there where he developed specific experience in the IB. I'm keen to ask him a little bit about that. And I know his time there included publishing a student textbook on the theory of knowledge. So we have a philosopher in our midst. Thomas studied at the University of Nottingham originally, reading history and politics, and he also holds an MBA in educational leadership from UCL. Tom, I can't wait to hear about your transition to the UAE and all things character, mentorship, your experiences of life. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You know that I am passionate about mentorship, everything to do with mentoring. So I've got to ask you who your mentor is, was, your early experiences of mentorship, anything you're happy to share with us.
I've been lucky, I think, is the first answer. I've had some wonderful influences on my career and my life, starting, I guess, with my father. My dad's, he brought me up on his own. So he's very dear to me. I think professionally, though, the better answer is the head of Aiglon College was Nicola Sparrow. And she, I worked with her closely for 8 years. And I think she was tough with me at times. And that was definitely what I needed. Sometimes I need reining in and telling to calm down. And I think she did that incredibly well. But more than that, two things I've taken from Nicola most, I think, in terms of mentorship are that kindness. Nicola is obsessed with kindness. She always talks about the need that if everyone is kind, if students are kind, if teachers are kind to students, if you develop a kind culture, actually that's the important part of a school. You mentioned philosophy, and I always quote to the kids Seneca's every human being is an opportunity for kindness, which I think is the key. And the other thing Nicola was big on really was planning for joy and planning for doing things, but just because they're fun for students and kids. And actually, I think one of the things we lose a bit in schools sometimes if we don't actively plan for joy and for fun. So probably the biggest mentor I would say, certainly the biggest influence on the way I am as a professional, but actually I'd say probably the way I am as a person was Nicola.
Amazing. And can I dig into that? How do you plan for joy? What's something you can practically instigate into a school environment at any stage to make that happen?
Yeah, so today, as I was saying to you before, is World Book Day here, and I was previously dressed as Willy Wonka, as that hat will attest. But again, I've just come from a wonderful little thing where everyone's in fancy dress and kids are sharing their favorite interests of books and that sort of stuff. That someone's had to plan to do that, and if you walk around today, there's people in fancy dress everywhere, and it brings smiles to people's faces. I think it's just sometimes taking that opportunity to say when are our community events, what's important for us. Nicola always insisted upon gathering the whole school together, and Aiglon College, I don't know if you know much about it, is a relatively small school of 480 students, but it's on a mountainside in a ski resort. So getting everyone in the same room was a big logistical challenge, despite the size of the school, but she insisted upon it because she wanted those opportunities for joy. So, and for community building, that sort of stuff. And that kind of defines the culture and the character of both the place and the people within it, I think. So I think it's valuable.
Lovely. And what about youthful Tom, even more youthful than you currently are now? An anecdote from growing up, from school, from your own education that shaped the person you are?
Yeah, so this is a funny one, to think back on it. I mean, the one that really springs to mind was an inspirational character. I had an incredibly aggressive and difficult, in certain respects, Northern Irish politics teacher, a man called Mr. Rooney, who I still know, still in touch with. And he was an absolute inspiration to me and lots of kids in a state school in Watford. Really elevated the level of not just politics and history, but debate. And he kind of inspired me and many other people. You couldn't get away with it today. He just used to sometimes dictate for half a lesson, and we just furiously write it down. You would get a failing for that sort of thing if you're observing it today. But he was brilliant. But I think the thing that's the anecdote, I guess, it springs to mind is, I was all right. I was an all right kid. I worked quite hard. I ended up getting straight A's and all that sort of stuff. But with the final parents' evening of my year 13, Kevin, or Mr. Rooney, laid into me in front of my dad. And my dad is important to me, and Kevin knew that. and he just absolutely hammered me. Said I was lazy, said I was useless, said I was going to underachieve, said I wasn't good enough. This really, really went at me. And of course, what happens if you do that to someone like me? I was absolutely livid, and I went away. I locked myself in a room for 2 months. I worked like an absolute machine. And in that particular politics exam, I don't like talking about your A-levels or whatever. You've got to grow past that. But I ended up getting 100% in the majority of my politics A-level just to prove him wrong. And I told him about this at a later date. And he said, yeah, I knew what I was doing. And what I loved about that, and knowing him as well as I do now, he meant that. He really was. He looked at me not as just as a result, as a number, but he thought, okay, what's the thing? That kid's all right, but he needs a bit of a kick. What's the thing that's going to trigger him? And it's about as well, something I devoted my career to, I guess, is putting students first. And, he had a difficult conversation. He upset me in front of my father. But he did it on purpose because he knew that was in my best interest, and he is strategically brilliant. So that's the thing that jumps out from my own personal schooling when you ask.
Yeah, so you've built a resilient layer to that. You've managed to look back on that experience with the positive effect it had. I think that's a really good story. Now, your career to date, I'm sure it's had peaks and troughs and bits you're proud of and bits that have been harder. Perhaps we could start with a tough moment, something that's been particularly challenging that you'd be happy to talk into, and then we can go straight from that into something that's a bit more of a peak or an Everest that you reflect upon so positively.
Yeah, I'll probably bring it recently, actually, in terms of the challenge, because I've got an interesting challenge that I've actually just documented in an article. I mean, obviously, I was working in a boarding school for 8 years, so challenge was kind of what we did. And equally, running a boarding school, helping to run a boarding school during COVID, is a kind of a fever dream, which I do not wish to return to if I can. But what I guess the most interesting thing about this new job, I've signed as a headmaster in this absolutely fabulous, not-for-profit school, one of the most prestigious schools in the Middle East, as you say. And I arrived here, my first headship. I arrived 38 years old. Never been a head before. Obviously, been in senior leadership for a while, and then there's the deputy head here is a man called Clive, who's been in the school for 28 years. And as I said the other day, if you run a school for the best part of 28 years or 14 years in his position, you are the machine. And I was really excited about working with him. He's a bit of a legend in the local area. And he basically resigned on my second day. And he resigned on my second day after on my first day, I decided to tell everyone I was going to watch and I was going to, I'm really going to learn, not going to change anything. And of course, he resigned on my second day. And then on my third day, I basically had to look at what he did. And what he did was completely irreplaceable. It didn't make sense to my conception of a modern hierarchical school structure. He did what I can only equate to a kind of a second master role in a traditional boarding school, kind of master of all trades, solver of all problems. And you couldn't map it. Even when I asked him to write his job description, it was kind of it was all over the place. But that's because he's organically grown over time, and therefore, fundamentally, of course, I had to essentially do a restructure on my fourth day. So that was probably the most interesting recent challenge where I was. I guess the philosophical or personal challenge there is you come in absolutely committed with a plan that you're going to do one thing, and then that plan is completely and utterly useless by the end of that first week. So that's probably the most recent fun change and challenge.
Wow. And what about peaks? Something that's been really celebrated as a highlight in recent months, or it could be further back.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental thing that jumps out is students, that again, I do what I do I'm a big believer in that education is transformation. I think that word isn't used enough. I think it's the place where obviously your family are probably your biggest influence on you in many cases. But I think behind that, school is where you literally become the person you're going to be. And that happens through a whole range of areas. I often say to people that everywhere in school is a classroom. A lunchroom is a classroom, a netball pitch is a classroom. They're all opportunities for us to grow and learn. So, I guess the interesting thing about that, all the positives are about students. I guess if you ask me my biggest peak, my proudest achievement in Eglon College, I had to go back to that previous one, was I had the privilege to run the scholarship scheme there. So Eglon was 10% scholar, and I ran that. And it meant that I got to go to places around the world. I set up one in Somaliland. I had the pleasure to go to New Mexico to set one up with the Navajo Indian Prep School. I also had the privilege of going to Palestine to work with a fantastic charity called Horizons. Also on that line, after when the war broke out, we actively looked to find a couple of students we previously met in Gaza who were displaced by war. and we found them and we brought them to Eglon. And Eglon is one of the most prestigious, but one of the most expensive schools in the world. And the fact that people were prepared to give their money to change people's lives. One of the first students I worked with was a Kenyan student whose dad was a yam farmer from Western Kenya. And she's still doing, I believe, a kind of a PhD in neuroscience in the University of Hawaii or somewhere like that. I forget where she's landed now, but she basically got 4 scholarships. And that ability for education to completely transform someone's life is the reason I come into work every day. But they would all be the peaks that spring to mind.
Amazing. Some very varied ones. I love the stories of the travel for the scholarship program through Eglon. That sounds amazing, visiting those different places.
Somaliland in itself is a series of podcasts traveling through there, which is relatively risky still, of course, because it's actually not a country as such, nor technically I suppose nor is Palestine in that respect. So depending on your political view. So yeah, interestingly, both of those had a lot of complications to even get there, let alone once you were there. So yeah.
Fascinating. Well, I hope where you are now proves a launch pad into all sorts of new and interesting places where you've not yet been. I'm sure it's going to be a whole new dynamic shift. It'll be fascinating. Content. So we love on this podcast to try and give people a bit of a steer on content. Lots of teachers, lots of educationalists, but your content does not have to be educational if you'd rather not. People have shared all sorts, from Disney movies right the way through to educational podcasts and books. Are you a reader? Are you a watcher? Are you a listener? First question is, how do you get your content? And then perhaps you can suggest some things for us that you think will spark our interest.
I was a reader, but then I've got 2 little kids, so I'm afraid that one has. I mean, it's World Book Day today, so I have recently read a wonderful book which my wife recommended me called Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kinselder, which is outstanding. But that isn't probably what I'll turn to. I mean, podcasts are my major form of content in some respects these days, and you're going to ask me which one particularly, but I mean, Rest is History is as a former history teacher, I love the banter and the camaraderie of those 2 guys and how they take you through, and the passion for knowledge and kind of nuance and all those sorts of bits. So that's probably where I go to. I do have an easy answer for this though, Henry, and it's this. So this is on my desk, and this is not just a ploy for this, is Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. I bought every senior leader here and in my last school a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. I think it's the most fabulous book. For those that don't know about it, Marcus Aurelius obviously was a famous, the most important man in the world when he ran Rome, and essentially he kept a journal in the simplest sense. Obviously, he's often seen as a Stoic philosopher. He might dispute that, but he's often seen as one of the most popular Stoics of all time in his kind of concepts. But he basically wrote down little bits of his life and how he thought about it, and I just find it so inspiring that when you are challenged, he was dealing with plague and war on 2 fronts, and people who didn't think because he was adopted that he should be in the position he was in, and all these sorts of things. And so the little snippets of how controlled he was, how thoughtful he was, and how, again, his focus on humility and kindness, it's always been an inspiration to me. So I try and read a little bit a day, every day, and I buy it for everyone who will listen. So I've got an easy recommendation there, which is that.
That's lovely. You're going to find a way for that to work in the student body there. Kind of, I can see it within a seminar time or a form time or something. Could be
Yeah, well,
school-wide.
I did a session on Stoicism actually for the year 12 last week, in particular, and I have already, if you check our website, I have taken my favourite quote, which I also write in the front of every notebook I have, which is a much longer quote, but Marcus Aurelius said, "Remind yourself your task is to be a good human being," and I say that on a regular basis, and I've put that on our website because, again, for me, that is the most important thing. Proud of your results, proud of your achievements, but actually the thing I'm trying to do, and we're all trying to do, is create good human beings.
It's lovely. I mean, it's essentially character education in motion, that, right? How do you reflect on character more broadly in the education space we're in at the moment? Do you think it's like can work in tandem with these academic outcomes? Like how do these things fit together to keep a school like Dubai College in its place with its academic standing and bring those things in? Is that a challenge?
It is a challenge because you measure what you can measure in life, and so I think that's an interesting piece. I mean, I've got quite out there views on this, possibly. I obviously I'm for knowledge. I think knowledge is actually a great form of character. So people often, when you start down this road, they think you're just for teaching skills and personalities, which incidentally I'm not in that regard. But again, my theory is, and I'll do it briefly because I know it's a short podcast, essentially education was character and well-being from the beginning, right? So again, I subscribe to kind of the Aristotelian school of eudaimonia and that sort of stuff, that we're actually trying to create well-being in people so that they are aware of themselves and they are, for want of a better word, happy. And if you look at the majority of education up until the Industrial Revolution, it was a moral point about how you should behave, whether that be kind of a Greek or Roman classical ideal of an education, or a religious education, which was a large form of education, which was about your moral behaviors. Actually, education as a form of imparting knowledge is a relatively young thing. It's actually quite a new thing, and it's also an entirely pragmatic thing, where it was about creating a workforce that were able to be literate and numerate to a certain level to help capitalist growth in that sort of area. So my theory is, and this is I guess the out there bit, is that in a future AI world, when there will be more automation of jobs in other areas, that actually character education will come to the absolute importance of education. That doesn't mean, just for the record, I don't think results are important. It doesn't mean I don't think knowledge is important. It doesn't mean I don't think learning is important. I love all of those things. But I do think that we'll go on a circular journey back to character education.
It feels that way to me already. You're preaching to the choir, and I totally believe in everything you said there. I don't think there's anything unpopular about that at all. And I don't know whether you've stolen my next question. Was that your unpopular opinion, or have you got an unpopular opinion for us separate to that?
So no, I do have an unpopular opinion. I don't know if my opinion is unpopular. I guess my twofold thing on this, I guess there's an element of this which riles people. My unpopular opinion, I guess, is that the present wasn't planned by the past. And what I mean by that is, everyone is obsessed with future jobs, future discussion, and like, let's get ourselves ready for robots and AI. And I am always one to remind people that there was no planning in 1994 for AI. There was no school teaching an AI course. Yet we have created this astonishing large language models that you can do all sorts of incredible things about, which I'm very passionate. But no one ever planned for that. It was planned for by great education, good knowledge, caring teachers, good schools, right? That's where it came from. And I guess so my question is always not, don't ask what AI changes, but ask what it doesn't change. And again, that leads me back to the idea of character education. So yeah, that I guess the thing I challenge when people work back from, here's what this future jobs thing says and future skills are needed, which I agree with, incidentally, because I agree with skills and I agree with character and I agree with being adaptive, flexible. All those things make perfect sense. But I think it's sometimes reductive and linear to say you're going towards this job, because I think that it forgets that we did not plan the present from the past. So I guess that's my unpopular opinion.
I love that. Very eloquently explained. Really, really enjoyed that. Thank you. And bear in mind, I've had the head of a union on this podcast who spoke about the unpopular opinion that humans are too keen on dogs. So you've gone way high level here. We're delighted with that kind of an answer. Maybe my last thing, we'll talk a little bit about DC before we finish too, but maybe a piece of advice you've got for people in the sector. And I say the sector because it's partly teachers, but it's educationalists and all walks of life working in commercial non-profit schools. What would be a piece of advice that you think's carried you well and you'd share with others?
Well, I mean, obviously, the obvious answer there is to return to Marcus and go, remind yourself your task is to be a good human being. But I won't. I will say, I'll say take work seriously, but you're never yourself. It's a bit of a cliche, but everyone I know who I've enjoyed working with has levity and humor. I think that, I've got friends who are surgeons and they say that the gallows humor in that area. I think that life is fun and it's more fun if it's fun. And if you can have a bit of joy at work and have a bit of, remind yourself to find a bit of joy. I'd say that's it. So don't take the work seriously, but never take yourself seriously ever. Hence the fact I was dressed as Willy Wonka today.
And it wouldn't be fair to leave this chat without speaking a little bit more into DC. Obviously, you've been there since January. Things are fairly fresh. What's next for the school? What's next for you? Anything you'd like to tell us about that you're particularly excited for in the coming months?
So I think that what's next is celebration of what we have, actually. I mean, I've been overwhelmed by what a wonderful school it is and what a wonderful community is. I mean, again, I would invite people here to see how special it is. Lots of people talk about it. It's got a palpable air of purposeful air because so many people here are committed to excellence. I think, excellence is one of our values, if it is a value. There's a question there. But excellence is something that we're really big on here, and it sounds like something on the bumper sticker or whatever, but actually everyone here is trying to do the best they can. Teachers, our support staff, everyone is really driven by that idea of doing the best. So that is an inspirational thing. But I guess what next is a celebration of character. I mean, I think what's really interesting is externally, people know about the fact that Dubai College has got 97% A to A star, right? So the thing they know about us is our outstanding academic achievement. We've also got some of the best sports team in the region. We just won the Young Musicians of the Golf award for one of our creative arts, and we also have set up now 3 years in a row schools in Nepal that are funded from this school. So we've got a big drive towards philanthropic development and service-based learning for our kids. But then beyond that, the thing that I've really loved is meeting these people. We've got a kid who invented a robotic hand to solve a problem. I met a kid yesterday because we got a TEDx on the weekend who is on their third hair growth because they were affected by someone with leukemia when they were young. So they've grown their hair long and they cut it off every time to donate it. We've got kids that are set up into schools climate competitions. We've got kids that set up a UAE-wide hackathon. The biggest hackathon in UAE was set up by a student team here. And I could go on, but I know and that's the thing that's most inspirational here is, yes, these are incredibly talented children. Yes, they're going to go and get great bumper results and great offers, but beyond that, they're doing wonderful things for those around them. So I think what's next is to celebrate that more. And also, again, you've heard my belief on education, to try and tell people that joy and character and relationships and, my first assembly, I asked the whole school to think about how I was feeling. And I said, that's empathy, and I could be scared and I could be worried, and that actually putting yourself in someone else's shoes from time to time is a really valuable value that you can do. So that's where next, hopefully.
Amazing. You've got a long to-do list and a lot of exciting things to be part of. I'm really grateful for you sharing so much time with us. It's been a fascinating chat full of levity and humor, just as you described, all the right things for a podcast. And we'll look forward to releasing this. And yeah, really, really grateful for the time you shared. So Tom Duckling, wishing you well for the hot summer ahead of you and right through into the autumn. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.